डॉक्टर बाबासाहेब आंबेडकर ओपन यूनिवर्सिटी.
Warm welcome into the Chaitanya studio of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University. I am Dr. AJAY Patel, and in this session we are going to discuss the concept regarding the cyber security framework or the cyber security policy. So, as we know, friend, for any we can say the cyber security framework or the cyber security policy is important, and because I would like to discuss with some scenario. If you are familiar, for the Indian context, we are discussing specifically around 95 for the larger organization, or we can say for the bank. The concept was evolving like IT department. Means at that time, in the initial period, from that the organization felt that they need IT infrastructure or the separate IT department, because before that there was no concept like separate IT department in India. But then after from the 95, slowly and gradually the companies were establishing the IT department, and the IT department is completely responsible, or is the IT department was taking care for the IT resources of the organization, and the IT department of particular organization was also responsible to define the IT access policy. But at that time, the cyber security related issues was not like challenging or major in a, we can say, major or intensity of the cyber security attacks was not like as much higher as compared to today's scenario. So slowly and gradually the acceptance of IT and the major organization completely diverting their business on IT. Now the increasing acceptance of the IT resources was also resultant into the increase of cyber security attacks. So in other words, we can say the growth of the IT infrastructure use had invited the attacker also. So again, from the 2010 onward, the concept was like that, the separate information security department. So apart from that IT department, the organization people felt that they need to set up a separate information security department also. So the role of the IT department and role of the IS, that means information security department, are completely different. And is, as we know, either it's an organization or any department, the policy is there. We can say policy is nothing but the set of specification or guideline or the direction for the to perform the activity. So we can say this is the guideline to rule book, guideline to rule book. So this is the policy. Policy has a clear and defined measures that how the organization will protect their assets and information systems and will make ensure it complies with legal and regulatory requirement. Now here we are discussing in terms of cyber security policy. So the cyber security policy has a clear and defined measure that how organization will protect their information systems, and also apart from the protecting, after from the protection, the legal compliance is also there. So they need to ensure about the legal compliance also. So this is the cyber security framework. So while we are discussing for the any policy, the life cycle is there, because from the conceptual phase to the disposal phase or the retirement phase, different phases are there. And each and every phase, in each and every phase, lots of activities or lots of to-do list is also defined. So the life cycle of the cyber security policy is much more complex than simply drafting written requirements, posting them on the corporate intranet. Employment of an organization policy life cycle approach as described here will help an organization ensure that these interrelated functions are performed consistently through the assignment of responsibility for the execution of each according to the level of policy. The approach can greatly improve the effectiveness of the organizational security policy, which is always a major goal, often a minor shortcoming. As we know, because the policy is there, so that means rules are there, and no one likes the rule. So first of all, because the IT security policy affects each and every employee of the organization and each and every stakeholder of the organization, the management has to act wisely, and they need to consist rather than to insist. They need to convince the people, convince the employee to follow the security, because the only documentation is meaningless. There are 11 functions that must be performed throughout the life of the policy document, from the cradle to grave, we can say from the conceptual phase to the disposal phase. So the first is the creation. This first phase includes the actual planning for research on and creation of the research and writing with other organization, both internal and external. So this is the most obvious phase of the policy documentation life cycle, because it is normally requires the most persistent effort. Now we will try to understand the entire security policy life cycle with real world example. So consider there is a bank, and bank is having various kind of IT infrastructure. The infrastructure contains the mobile application. This infrastructure also contains the web application for the online banking. This bank contains the network, we can say the networking or network connectivity management system for its various branches. So this network provides the connectivity among them. Then after obviously there are number of persons, those who are using this facility on a regular basis. They might be employee of the organization, they might be the customer or of the organization, or they might be the contractor or vendor for the bank. So looking toward this entire scenario, bank needs to maintain uh, or bank needs to protect its IT infrastructure. Now, as we know, the IT infrastructure, that means bank needs to protect its mobile banking application. Bank needs to maintain its internet banking application. Bank needs to maintain or bank needs to secure its network also. But apart from that, bank needs to convince its employees, its customer and its other stakeholders regarding this IT policy, because you can define, you can prevent, create the very much pretty policy on paper, but until and unless all the stakeholder, without the acceptance of all the stakeholders, you cannot successfully implement the life cycle. So at this time, for the creation, because the creation phase is the most important, for the creation phase you need to study the different policies for the organizations, those who are involved in a similar kind of business. You are also need to understand the various threats which affect the business of your organization. And obviously you need to understand the legal compliance, because for while we are discussing banking industry, you need to follow the RBI compliance, and certain other compliance are also there. So looking toward the scenario, you need to draft or you need to create your cyber security policy. So the maximum input or maximum study you perform, parallelly you are also required to understand the demand or upcoming demand or upcoming scenario of your business also, because as we know, we are using the mobile banking, but before 10 years the concept of mobile banking was not there. So this is the scenario right now, where we can withdraw the money from the ATM by using the ATM cards, but within a very short time span, you could withdraw the money from your from ATM without ATM card also. So your policy should be prepared according to this business scenario only. Then after you can successfully create the policy, and your policy will perform successfully or effectively. Then after review, now after the creation, you need to assess the policy, and we can say the assessment, the people, those who are involved into the assessment must be outsider of the organization, or we can say the third party, and the third party needs the sound knowledge of the banking as well as for example, in our case, because we are discussing the banking case study, as well as they should be powerful in terms of technical aspect also, because they are familiar, or they should have proficient knowledge regarding the threats, regarding the technical aspects of the network system, etc., etc. So it entails the identifying the individual or group responsible for the review, presenting the policy, addressing the question regarding the policy, explaining the policy's context, justifying the policy, addressing the comment, recommendation for the change to policy, and making necessary uh, adjustment and revision. So the review phase contains all these steps, like review, present the policy, address the question regarding the policy, explanation about the policy, justify the policy, because when your management asks why this clause, or why these are the mandatory provision required in the policy, at that time, during the review process, the policy maker as well as the reviewing or assessor needs to justify regarding that. And then after, the recommendation for the change is also responsibility of the reviewer, and making necessary adjustment and revision. So this is the review process. Now approval phase, that means endorsement of the policy by accompanying official in a position of authority which permits the implementation of a policy. So in our case, we can say the board of the bank, who is the final responsibility or final authority for, in terms of decision taking. So for the policy implementation, the entire policy draft, error-free policy draft, must be presented into board, and by approval of board, the policy can be implemented. So approval, the appropriate authority for the approval must be identified, because as we know, the body must be higher than the user. Approval body or approving authority must be higher. In our case, for example, banking application, the CEO, the general managers, or all are the senior cadre will also use the banking application, and their technical knowledge regarding the cybersecurity threats are also questionable. So if, as a cybersecurity professional, want to imply the guideline on a senior cadre also, then the best way is to seek the approval from the highest authority. So this is the approval process. Then after, communication. Now communication is the most important thing, because obviously you need to implement the policy forcefully, but the end user, that means the employees of the organization, should not feel like that this policy is insisted to follow. Means the information security team is insisting the employees to follow this procedure. So for any implementation, the end user resistance must be addressed, because the success for any policy is purely depends on the end user's acceptance. If the end user accepts the we can say any new changes in a organization, then the success of your policy or your success of your efforts will be guaranteed. But once you are facing the huge end user resistance, then you need to rethink or you need to revise. But before that, you need to convince the end users regarding the policy. So communication is the best way, because once the policy has been approved, it must be initially disseminated to the company's employees or contractors who are affected by the policy. Now, subtask of this policy includes making a determination of the extent of the initial distribution, addressing issues of geography, language and culture, prevention of unauthorized disclosure, if applicable, method of distribution and use of supervisory chain. So all these things should be addressed clearly. The communication should be made loud and clear regarding the geographical issues, cultural and language issues. The most hazardous part is prevention of unauthorized disclosure and the method of distribution and use of supervisory chain. So all this communication should be made loud and clear to the end user. Next, implementation, the real phase, because in this phase the policy will be implemented. So this is the phase for which the entire situation or entire steps have been defined. The implementation phase. This phase encompasses activities to initially execute the policies, such as ensuring that the policy is understood, interpreting how the policy can best be implemented in various situations and organizational elements, monitoring the pace, extent and effectiveness of the implementation activity, measuring the policy's impact on operation. So all these are the important parameters, and these parameters need to be addressed because the implementation is the most important part. Now, awareness. The awareness phase comprises continuing efforts to ensure that personnel are aware of the policy in order to facilitate their compliance with policy requirements. This is done by addressing various audience within the organization, executing line managers, users with tailored awareness messages regarding the need of adherence policy. So awareness is also very important, because as we discuss, the end user resistance is the main concern for the implementation of any policy. If huge acceptance from the end users have been received, then the success of the policy will be guaranteed. So for that, you need to spread the awareness. You need to convey the importance of policy. You need to convey the possible threats from which the organization might get affected, and to overcome this kind of situation, such kind of policies are required. Even if the end user need to re-engineer their process, they should accept this kind of processes. So this is the awareness. Then after, expectation. Because of operational environment, timing, personnel shortage, etc., not every policy can be complied with as intended. Therefore exception should be there. So you need to define the exception also, but the most important is that for the exception you need to define the clear and cut guideline. That means who are the person who can provide the exceptions, and for which kind of person activities or which kind of access, the who are the responsible to provide the exceptional access. And even after the exceptional access, the documentation regarding the access track must be maintained, and even the exceptional access should also be monitored. So this kind of activity should be mentioned into the exception phase. Now, then after compliance monitoring, during the compliance monitoring, the effectiveness of the effort to implement the policy is tracked and reported. This information results from formal audit, inspection, and reviews from supervisor, employee, and from violation report, incident response activity. The violation reports are very important. This phase includes activities to monitor the level of compliance with the policy and to report the deficiencies to appropriate management authority. So the compliance monitoring is also important. Enforcement. The compliance muscle behind the policy is effective enforcement. Act or omission that violate the policy must be addressed through the management enforcement effort. So violation is natural or is common, but to minimize the violation, that means that once violation is identified, the appropriate corrective action must be determined and applied to address the violation to prevent its recurrence. So through which we can minimize the violation in the policy. Maintenance. The phase address the process of ensuring the currency integrity of the policy issues dealt with. In phase, this policy include tracking drivers for change. There are changes in technology, processes, people, organization, business focus, recommending and coordinating policy modifications as necessary, documenting changes, activities, and ensuring the availability of the policy. While changes to the policy are required, several phases must be revisited: review, approval, communication, and implementation in particular. Retirement. So every policy must be retired when it served the purpose. After the policy has served its useful purpose, company no longer use the technology for which it applies, or it has been superseded by another policy, then it must be retired. This entails removing from from the inventory to active policy, archiving it for future reference, and documenting information about the decision to retire the policy. So friend, this is the life cycle of the cyber security policy, and we discuss in this session regarding the various phases of the policy life cycle, and hope this discussion would be fruitful for you, and I would like to conclude this session at here. Thank you friend, thank you very much.
स्वाध्यायः